Before we get started, hit the comments and tell me where you're watching from and what time it is over there. Whether you're catching sunrise in Nairobi, burning midnight in New York, afternoon in Canada, or evening in France, I want to hear from you. Don't just watch silently, let me know where in the world you are. Now let's dive into the story. They laughed when the mop slipped from his hands. Not a soft chuckle, real laughter, sharp and careless, echoing off polished concrete. The kind that stings longer than words. The old janitor bent slowly, knees creaking, fingers stiff with bleach and age, while boots paused around him like he was part of the floor. His name was Eldon Pike, and to them he was invisible until he messed up. A recruit nudged another and whispered something cruel. Someone else snorted. Eldon kept his eyes down. He had learned that lesson long ago. Look down, stay small, don't invite trouble. The mop handle trembled as he lifted it. On his wrist, a faded bandage peeled back, exposing old skin that hadn't seen sunlight in years. The base cafeteria smelled of coffee, metal trays, and sweat soaked into uniforms. Morning drills had ended, tempers were loose, and laughter came easy. Eldon shuffled toward the spill, shoes squeaking, back bowed like a man carrying more than his years. A lieutenant, young, sharp, too confident, stepped into his path. "Hey, Grandpa," he said, voice loud enough to gather attention. "Careful. This isn't a retirement home." The room cracked open with noise. Eldon nodded once, apologetic, and tried to pass. The lieutenant didn't move. Eldon's sleeve slid up as he reached for the mop, and for half a second, ink peeked through, dark lines, weathered, almost forgotten. No one noticed. Not yet. Eldon wiped the spill with slow, practiced strokes. His breath stayed even though his chest burned. He remembered other floors, other messes, sand slick with blood, decks rocking under gunfire, but those memories stayed locked behind his eyes. Here he was just the janitor. The laughter faded into background noise, replaced by the clatter of trays and the hiss of coffee machines. A siren wailed faintly outside, distant and wrong for this hour. Eldon paused. His head lifted just a fraction. The sound threaded into him like a needle. He knew that tone. He had heard it once before in another life, when seconds mattered and silence killed. The siren cut off. Too fast. Too clean. The room relaxed again. Eldon returned to mopping, but his hand had stopped shaking. The lieutenant scoffed and walked away. As Eldon turned, his sleeve snagged on the mop handle and rolled higher than before. This time the ink showed clearly, an old Frogman insignia, scarred and unmistakable, wrapped around his forearm like a coiled memory. A nearby chief petty officer froze mid-step. His tray slipped, crashing to the floor. The sound silenced the room. Eyes followed his stare to Eldon's arm. Eldon felt it then, the shift in the air, the sudden weight of attention. He pulled his sleeve down too late. Outside, alarms began to scream for real. And the base, moments from disaster, had just noticed the janitor. The alarms outside didn't just scream, they tore through the base like a living thing. Red lights snapped on, washing the cafeteria in flashing color. Recruits jumped to their feet. Chairs scraped. Orders barked over loudspeakers came out clipped and urgent, missing pieces like someone was already running while speaking. Eldon Pike stood very still, mop planted on the floor, heart steady in a way it hadn't been in years. Chaos had a smell, ozone, sweat, fear, and he recognized it instantly. It smelled the same everywhere. The chief petty officer who dropped his tray stared at Eldon as if he'd seen a ghost crawl out of the past. His mouth opened, closed, then opened again. "That tattoo," he said quietly, almost to himself. Eldon met his eyes for the first time. Just a look. Come. The kind of eyes that had watched tides rise and men disappear under black water. Eldon gave a tiny shake of his head, a warning or maybe a plea. Not here. Not now. The chief swallowed hard and turned away as officers flooded in, shouting for evacuation routes and lockdown protocols. As everyone rushed out, Eldon moved the other way. Not fast. Not slow. Purposeful. His cart rattled as he pushed it into a service corridor that smelled of rust and bleach. The alarms faded behind concrete walls. With each step the years peeled back. The limp in his walk wasn't from age, it was from shrapnel, buried and forgotten by doctors who never knew where it came from. He reached a janitor's closet and shut the door behind him. Darkness. Silence except for his breathing. He leaned the mop aside and rolled up his sleeve. The Frogman tattoo was ugly now. Ink blurred by time, edges eaten by scars. It had been sharp once. Earned. Not given. Eldon pressed his thumb into the skin and closed his eyes. A younger version of him surfaced, wet hair plastered to his skull, lungs burning, hands numb around a knife as cold water swallowed sound. He remembered the instructor's voice. Asterisk, if you panic, you die. If you hesitate, your team dies. Asterisk, Eldon hadn't panicked. He never had. That was the problem. When the missions ended, the stillness didn't come back. Years earlier, the base hadn't existed. Neither had the mob. Eldon had come home to a house that felt too quiet, to a wife who tried not to ask questions and a son who stopped waiting by the window. Nightmares filled the silence. He tried construction. Then security. Then nothing. The drinking came and went. The work disappeared for good. When his wife left, she said, "You're here but you're not." Eldon didn't argue. He didn't know how. The janitor job was simple. Honest. Quiet. Quiet felt safe. A sharp knock rattled the closet door. Eldon opened his eyes. The present snapped back into place. "Pike," a voice said, low, controlled. "Not young. Open up." Eldon sighed and pulled his sleeve down. When he opened the door, a man stood there in full command uniform, silver hair tight, eyes hard as steel. Commander Harlan Voss. A name Eldon hadn't heard in decades, but a face he recognized instantly. Voss's gaze dropped to Eldon's forearm, then back to his face. "I thought you were dead," Voss said. "So did I," Eldon replied. Voss stepped aside as more alarms wailed overhead. "We have an unidentified breach offshore," he said. "Silent entry. Our sensors went dark for 90 seconds. He paused. "That doesn't happen by accident." Eldon looked past him toward the distant roar of the sea. His jaw tightened. Somewhere out there, someone was moving the way only a few men knew how. And Eldon Pike knew exactly what that meant. Commander Voss didn't wait for permission. He turned and walked, expecting Eldon to follow. And Eldon did. Not because of rank. Because of gravity. Some men carried it without trying. The hallway lights flickered as they moved deeper into the base, boots pounding past them, rifles clutched tight. Eldon's janitor cart sat abandoned in the corridor like a shed skin. With every step, the disguise fell away. His shoulders straightened. His breathing synced with the alarms. He wasn't rushing, but he wasn't hesitating either. They entered a command room buzzing with controlled panic. Screens showed dark water, broken sensor feeds, static where certainty should be. Officers spoke fast and wrong, tripping over each other's words. Voss raised a hand. Silence snapped into place. He pointed at the largest screen. "This breach used a thermal gap and timed currents," he said. "Textbook Frogman entry. No bubbles. No wake. Whoever it is, they're inside our perimeter." Eyes flicked to Eldon. Some curious. Some confused. One young captain frowned. "Sir," he said, "with respect, this man's a civilian." Eldon didn't react. He studied the screen. The black water. The angle of approach. The dead zone. His voice came out calm, almost gentle. "They came in on the third tide shift," he said. "Used the rocks to mask sonar. Two-man team. Maybe three." Fingers froze over keyboards. Heads turned fully now. Eldon leaned closer to the screen. "They'll avoid the armory," he continued. "Too obvious. They're heading for communications or fuel. Something that forces confusion before impact." He stepped back. "You've got maybe 10 minutes. The room breathed again, fast and shallow. Voss watched Eldon like a man watching a mirror crack. "You sure?" he asked. Eldon nodded once. "I've done it," he said. He didn't say when, or where, or what it cost. The captain opened his mouth to argue, then closed it as the screen flashed. Motion detected. Exactly where Eldon had pointed. A ripple through the room. Fear sharpened into focus. Voss turned. "Prep a response team," he ordered. Then quieter to Eldon, "I need you." The armory smelled like oil and cold metal. Eldon hadn't been here in years. Maybe ever. A technician hesitated as Eldon reached for a rifle. "Sir." Voss nodded. "Issue it." The weight settled into Eldon's hands like memory. Not heavy. Familiar. He checked it with quick, efficient movements. No show. No flourish. A young sergeant watched, eyes wide. "You really a frogman?" he asked, half in awe, half in disbelief. Eldon met his gaze. "I was," he said. "Once." As they moved toward the perimeter, the base seemed to shrink around them. Corridors narrowed. Shadows deepened. Eldon's mind split cleanly in two. One part here, counting steps, listening to echoes. The other drifting backward to a night with no moon, water like ink, a teammate's hand squeezing his shoulder twice before letting go forever. He swallowed hard. Ghosts didn't retire. They waited. They reached an exterior access point overlooking the rocky shoreline. Wind whipped salt into their faces. Below, waves smashed against stone, loud enough to hide anything. Eldon crouched, scanning. He raised a hand. The team froze. "Listen," he whispered. Beneath the crash of water there was a wrong sound. Metal against rock. Controlled. Intentional. Eldon's pulse stayed slow. "They're already ashore," he said. "And they know this place better than you think." A flare burst somewhere down the coast. Light bloomed then died. Eldon's jaw set. That wasn't random. That was a signal. He looked at Voss. "This isn't a test," he said. "It's personal." Voss's eyes narrowed. "How do you know?" Eldon didn't answer right away. He felt the old ache in his forearm beneath the tattoo. The ink seemed to burn. "Because," he said finally, "the only men who move like that are the ones who survived us." And somewhere in the dark, someone was counting on Eldon Pike to still be broken. The shoreline felt smaller at night. Rocks jutted like teeth, slick with algae and spray. Eldon moved low, boots finding purchase without sound, every step measured. The response team followed his lead, though most of them didn't realize it. They were trained well, but training lived in manuals. What Eldon carried lived in his bones. The wind shifted. He tasted it. Salt, oil, and something faintly metallic. He raised 2 fingers. "Stop." The team froze again, breath held, rifles steady. A shadow peeled away from the rocks below. Then another. Eldon counted 3. Just like he'd said. They moved with patience, not fear, using the surf as cover, timing steps between waves. Professionals. Eldon's chest tightened, not with panic but with recognition. He knew that walk. He'd walked it himself decades ago before the world taught him what survival cost. He glanced at Voss. "They'll split," he whispered. 1 distraction. 2 push inward. As if summoned by his words, a sharp crack echoed to the east. A small explosion, controlled, meant to pull eyes and boots away. Radios chirped. Orders overlapped. Confusion bloomed. The younger officers reacted fast but loud. Eldon slipped past them, angling toward a narrow path cut into the cliff. He didn't explain. There wasn't time. This was instinct now. He felt the old rhythm return. Move, listen, decide. His breath stayed slow. His hands steady. At the top of the path, he crouched behind a rusted barrier and waited. Seconds stretched. Then a shape rose in front of him, knife glinting. Eldon moved first. 1 sharp strike. A twist. The man went down without a sound. Eldon caught him, lowered him gently, like setting down something fragile. He checked the face. Young. Focused. Not the one he was waiting for. Gunfire erupted behind him. Shouts. Boots pounding. Eldon didn't turn. He knew where the last man would go. He followed the edge of the base fence toward an old maintenance gate, half-hidden, rarely used. The janitor had unlocked it 100 times. That mattered. He reached it just as a figure slipped through, fast and confident. Eldon stepped out of the shadows. "You're late," he said. The man froze. Slowly he turned. Their eyes met. Recognition hit like a punch. "Pike," the man breathed. His accent was wrong now, polished by years elsewhere, but the voice underneath was the same. Rowan Kess, once Eldon's teammate. Once his responsibility. The man who hadn't come back from the last dive, except he had. Just not to them. Rowan's gaze dropped to Eldon's forearm. "Ugh. They told me you quit," Rowan said. Eldon shook his head. "They told me you were dead." A beat. Wind howled between them. Alarms wailed in the distance. Rowan's mouth twitched, not quite a smile. Funny how that works. He shifted his weight, calculating. Eldon saw it and didn't flinch. "You don't belong here," Eldon said. "This place is full of kids." Rowan's eyes hardened. "So was the last one," he replied. "They send us in. They forget us. I just stopped letting them." Rowan lunged. The fight was fast, brutal, quiet. Metal rang once, then again. Eldon felt the burn in his side as a blade grazed him, but he stayed upright. He always had. He disarmed Rowan with a twist learned the hard way and drove him to the ground. They lay there, breathing hard, foreheads nearly touching. "It doesn't have to end like this," Eldon said. Rowan laughed, a short, bitter sound. "It already did," he said. "You just didn't notice." Footsteps closed in. Lights flared. Voices shouted. Eldon rose slowly, hands up. Rowan didn't resist as he was cuffed. As they dragged him away, he looked back once. "They laughed at you, didn't they?" Rowan called out. "Just like they did to us." Eldon said nothing. But as he watched Rowan disappear into the light, he knew this wasn't over. Not for him. Not for the base. And not for the ghost they'd both carried in with them. Dawn crept in like it was afraid to interrupt. Pale light slid over the base, revealing spent shell casings, torn gloves, and faces drawn tight from a night that went too close. Eldon sat on a low concrete barrier near the infirmary, a white bandage wrapped around his side, faint red blooming through it. Medics moved past him, busy and quiet. No one laughed now. No one joked. The base felt older somehow, like it had aged overnight. Commander Voss stood a few feet away, hands clasped behind his back, staring out toward the sea. He hadn't thanked Eldon. Not yet. Men like Voss saved gratitude for moments when it mattered. You could have walked away, he said finally. You didn't owe us anything. Eldon watched a gull circle above the water. I owed myself, he replied. The words surprised him as he said them. They tasted true. News spread fast on a base. By mid-morning, everyone knew about the janitor. The Frogman tattoo. The fight at the fence. The man who'd moved like he belonged in the dark. Recruits whispered as Eldon passed. Some stared with open awe. Others with shame. The lieutenant from the cafeteria couldn't meet his eyes. Eldon felt the weight of it all pressing in. Being invisible had hurt. Being seen hurt differently. In a small interrogation room, Rowan Kess sat with his wrists cuffed to the table. His face was bruised, lips split, eyes still sharp. Voss and Eldon stood on opposite sides of him. You used old access routes, Voss said. Knowledge you shouldn't have. Rowan shrugged. You never erased us, he said. You just stopped looking. His gaze slid to Eldon. They put you on a mop, he added softly. That's what hurts, isn't it? Eldon felt something twist in his chest. Not anger. Not regret. Something heavier. They gave me a job, Eldon said. That was more than nothing. Rowan shook his head. You tell yourself that, he replied. I told myself something else. Silence filled the room, thick and uncomfortable. Finally, Voss ordered Rowan taken away. As guards pulled him up, Rowan leaned close to Eldon. They'll use you now, he whispered. Until they're done. Then he was gone. That afternoon, Eldon stood alone in the locker room, staring at his reflection. The janitor's uniform hung loose on his frame. Beneath it, old muscle still held, stubborn and quiet. He rolled up his sleeve and looked at the tattoo again. For years, he'd hidden it out of shame. Shame for surviving, for leaving others behind, for not knowing how to live afterward. Now it stared back at him like a question he could no longer ignore. A knock sounded. The chief petty officer stepped in, the same one who'd frozen in the cafeteria. Sir, he said, then hesitated. Eldon. He cleared his throat. Some of the men want to thank you. Eldon shook his head. Tell them to train harder, he said. That'll be thanks enough. The chief nodded, understanding more than he said. As night fell again, Eldon walked the perimeter alone. The sea was calm, deceptively so. He thought of his son, grown now, distant but still alive. He thought of the floors he'd cleaned, the laughter he'd swallowed, the years he'd let pass because it felt easier than remembering who he was. Rowan's words echoed in his mind. They'll use you now, maybe they would. Maybe not. Eldon stopped and looked back at the base, lights steady, guarded. He wasn't invisible anymore. That scared him. But for the first time in a long while, it also felt like a choice. And somewhere deep inside, beneath the scars and the silence, something old and steady began to wake up again. The knock came just after midnight. Not loud. Not urgent. 3 slow taps on Eldon's temporary quarters door, spaced like someone who knew patience better than force. Eldon was already awake. Sleep had learned to avoid him. He reached for the chair beside the bed where his folded clothes lay, fingers brushing the fabric as if checking it was real. Another knock. Same rhythm. Eldon stood, joints stiff, and opened the door. Commander Voss stood there alone, jacket off, sleeves rolled, looking older than he had in daylight. We need to talk, Voss said. Eldon stepped aside. The room was bare, government-issued bed, metal desk, a single chair. Nothing personal. Voss took it in with a glance and frowned. This won't be official, he said. No reports. No recordings. Eldon nodded. He understood what that meant. Truth lived better in the dark. They traced Rowan's route, Voss began. He wasn't alone before tonight. There are others. Former units. Forgotten men. He paused. They're watching bases like this one. Waiting for weakness. Eldon leaned against the desk, arms crossed. You already know what they want, he said. To prove they still matter. Voss exhaled slowly. They want revenge, he corrected. And they're organized. A file slid across the desk. Photos. Names. Faces Eldon hadn't seen in years, some older, some hardened, some barely recognizable. His stomach tightened as each memory stirred. "You're building a response team," Eldon said. It wasn't a question. Voss met his eyes. "I want you to advise," he said. "Train them. Teach them how men like Rowan think." Eldon's jaw clenched. "I'm done being used," he said quietly. Voss didn't argue. "Your son called the base today," he said instead. The words landed hard. Eldon's breath caught despite himself. "He heard about last night," Voss continued. "He asked if you were okay." Silence filled the room. Eldon stared at the wall, blinking once. "You didn't answer," he said. Voss shook his head. "I told him you'd call." He stood. "Think about it." After Voss left, Eldon sat alone with the file spread open. Each face was a thread pulling him backward. Nights underwater, whispered jokes through regulators, promises made without thinking they'd need to be kept forever. He remembered the mission that broke them. The one that ended everything. Orders changed mid-dive. Extraction delayed. Rowan had gone back for a man who was already gone. Eldon had followed. Only one of them had come up clean. The other had come up changed. At dawn, Eldon found himself back in the cafeteria. Same tables. Same smell. Different eyes. He carried his tray carefully, shoulders squared. The lieutenant from before stood as Eldon passed. "Sir," he said, voice tight. "I owe you an apology." Eldon looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. "Make it count," he said, and kept walking. That was all. Outside, the training yard echoed with shouts and gunfire drills. Eldon stopped at the edge, watching young soldiers move with speed but little patience. He saw gaps they couldn't see. Habits that would get them killed. His hands curled into fists without his permission. A memory surfaced. His son at 8 years old, trying to learn to swim, panicking until Eldon steadied him. "Slow down," he'd said. "Trust the water." Eldon turned back toward his quarters. Halfway there he stopped. He pulled out his phone, thumb hovering over a number he hadn't called in years. The screen lit his face. He hesitated. Then he pressed call. As it rang, Eldon looked at his forearm one more time. The tattoo didn't feel like a wound anymore. It felt like a responsibility. When the call connected, Eldon spoke first. "It's me," he said. His voice was rough but steady. "I'm still here." The sun climbed hard and fast, burning the last of the morning chill off the yard. Eldon stood in front of 12 soldiers lined shoulder to shoulder, boots squared, eyes forward. They were young, too young to know what silence underwater could do to a man's thoughts, but disciplined enough to hide their nerves. Commander Voss watched from a distance, arms crossed, saying nothing. This wasn't a ceremony. No speeches. No introductions. Eldon preferred it that way. "Drop your packs," Eldon said. His voice wasn't loud, but it cut clean. The soldiers hesitated for half a second, then obeyed. Packs hit the ground with dull thuds. "If you wait for permission in the dark," Eldon continued, pacing slowly, "you won't get it. You'll get a body bag." A few throats tightened. One soldier swallowed hard. Eldon stopped in front of him. "What's your name?" "Carter, sir." Eldon nodded. "Carter will be dead first if he keeps locking his knees." Carter unlocked them instantly. Eldon moved on. He didn't teach them how to shoot. They already knew that. He taught them how to listen, to the wind, to gravel shifting under weight, to the absence of sound where sound should be. He had them crawl blindfolded through sand while others tried to stalk them. He made them sit in cold water until shivering turned into focus. "Panic wastes air," Eldon said. "Fear wastes time. You only get so much of both." Between drills, Eldon felt it, the old ache in his side, the burn in his lungs. He ignored it. Pain was honest. It told you where you were weak. As the hours passed, the soldiers stopped looking at him like a legend and started looking at him like a guide. Someone who'd walked ahead and come back with a map drawn in scars. That mattered more. By late afternoon, Eldon pulled Carter aside. "Why are you here?" he asked. Carter hesitated. "My dad," he said. "He died overseas. I didn't want it to be for nothing." Eldon studied him. "Nothing is never nothing," he said. "But don't confuse revenge with purpose. They look the same until it's too late." Carter nodded, eyes glassy. Eldon placed a hand on his shoulder, brief, grounding, then stepped away. As night fell, Eldon stood alone at the edge of the yard. The sea was calm again, reflecting the sky like black glass. His phone buzzed. A message. "Call me when you can. Dad." Eldon read it twice. He hadn't saved the number with a name, but he didn't need to. Something loosened in his chest. Not healed. Just loosened. Behind him, Voss approached. They listen to you, Voss said. Eldon shrugged. They listen to the truth. Voss nodded. We intercepted a transmission, he added. Encrypted. Short. Same signature Rowan used. Eldon's jaw tightened. What did it say? Voss met his eyes. Asterisk the janitor remembers. Asterisk. Eldon felt the weight of it settle in. This wasn't just about a base anymore. It was about legacy, who got erased and who refused to stay buried. He looked back at the water, at the dark stretch where past and present met without warning. Then they'll come harder, Eldon said. And you? Voss asked. Eldon rolled down his sleeve, covering the tattoo, not to hide it but to protect it. I'll be ready, he said. And for the first time in years he knew that was true. The night was thick with fog, the kind that swallowed light and sound alike. Eldon crouched on the ridge overlooking the base perimeter, eyes scanning the dim outlines of sentries and floodlights. The younger soldiers were positioned strategically, tense and eager, rifles cradled. Eldon felt the rhythm return, heart steady, senses sharp. He hadn't felt this alive in decades. Behind his calm exterior, every muscle remembered. Movement, Eldon whispered. Shadows slid over the rocks below, 3 figures, low, deliberate. Each carried equipment, weapons, intent. He recognized the patterns immediately, military precision but improvisation layered in, a hallmark of seasoned operators. Split, he said, pointing. 1 goes north, 2 hit the south gate. The soldiers nodded, silent. They'd learned to listen, but they didn't know what it felt like to hear the enemy before he acted. Eldon slipped down the ridge, silent as mist. The first man neared a sensor, careful, but Eldon's hand was faster. He caught the man by surprise, a quiet takedown, dragging him into shadow. A breath. Another movement. Eldon adjusted his approach, knowing each step would decide life or death. The night smelled of salt, oil, and adrenaline. The sea murmured below, indifferent, constant. At the south gate, Eldon's team engaged their targets. Shots rang in short, controlled bursts, nothing wasted, everything precise. Eldon moved among them, correcting stances, guiding, pushing. His eyes caught a fleeting glimpse of Rowan, alive, determined, and still burning with the old fire. Rowan's eyes met Eldon's for a heartbeat. Recognition, challenge, and old camaraderie all wrapped in one glance. Rowan smiled bitterly, and Eldon felt the old ache, the one he'd buried under janitor mops and quiet days, resurface. Rowan lunged, knife glinting under a floodlight. Eldon met him mid-strike. They twisted and fought like men half their age, bodies moving on memory, instinct, pain. Rowan tried to exploit a weak side, but Eldon anticipated it, countering, disarming, forcing him down without killing. The younger soldiers watched, mouths open, as the old janitor moved like a phantom from stories they'd only half believed. Sirens flared as the rest of Rowan's team attempted retreat. Eldon signaled his soldiers, who were ready now, trained, sharp, disciplined. With precise coordination they cut off escape routes. Voss arrived just in time to oversee containment. Rowan's men surrendered quietly, understanding that this wasn't a battle. They were in Eldon's world now. One by one, captured, contained, neutralized. Finally, Eldon stood over Rowan. The wind whipped cold, carrying salt and distant waves. You shouldn't have come back, Eldon said, voice low but steady. Rowan laughed, short, bitter. Neither should you have stayed, he replied. We're both still here. Eldon didn't answer. He only watched the fog swallow the horizon, knowing the fight was over, for now. Rowan was cuffed, eyes still defiant, lips pressing into a thin line. Eldon turned away, sleeve pulled down over the Frogman tattoo. The night air felt lighter somehow, though the scars beneath it still ached. He had fought ghosts, faced past sins, and finally reclaimed his place, not just as a janitor, but as the man who had never truly stopped being who he was. The base and its people would never laugh at him again. Morning came in harsh streaks of light, cutting across the base like a spotlight on guilty consciences. Eldon walked the perimeter slowly, hands behind his back, boots echoing on concrete. The aftermath of the night was visible everywhere. Disheveled sandbags, crushed shrubs, tire marks where vehicles had chased shadows. Soldiers moved with careful purpose, cleaning up, checking equipment, whispering among themselves. Eyes followed Eldon. Not with mockery this time. Respect. Some even fear. It was a weight he felt in every step. Rowan Kess sat in the interrogation room, silent now, bruises dark across his face. His usual defiance had been tempered by exhaustion, strategy, and Eldon's presence. Voss stood across the room, his expression unreadable. He underestimated you, Voss said. Eldon didn't respond. Rowan finally looked up, eyes meeting his. You've changed, he said, voice quiet but sharp. Eldon shrugged. I'm not who you left behind. The air between them was tense, thick with memories, anger, and unspoken regrets. Outside, the captured operatives were secured, transported under heavy guard. Eldon lingered near the hangar, watching the young soldiers he had trained execute every step with precision. He remembered when he had been them, eager, fearless, naive. Now they carried something heavier, knowledge of consequence, the understanding that every misstep could mean death. He allowed himself a small, almost imperceptible nod. It was a recognition of victory but also of responsibility. Voss joined him. You could have stayed a janitor, he said quietly. You could have ignored it all. Eldon turned to face him. And let them win? He asked. You underestimate ghosts, he said. We don't disappear. We adapt. We wait. We act when needed. Voss studied him for a long moment, then nodded, acknowledging not just the man's skill but the history behind every scar and every choice. Eldon returned to the cafeteria. The lieutenant from the first morning approached him slowly, careful. Sir, the men, he began. Eldon raised a hand. Tell them the job is done. They did well. That's enough. The lieutenant nodded, relief flooding his features. For the first time, the base felt like a place where laughter wouldn't cut the wrong way. Where respect didn't need explanation. In a quiet corner, Eldon unrolled his sleeve, exposing the Frogman tattoo once again. Sunlight hit the faded ink, giving it life. He traced it lightly with a finger. So many ghosts rested beneath it. Friends lost, missions survived, mistakes carried silently. The tattoo was more than ink, it was memory, identity, and the promise never to be invisible again. Rowan's voice echoed briefly in Eldon's mind. We're both still here. Eldon exhaled slowly. Yes, still here. Not broken. Not erased. Stronger, wiser, and finally seen for everything he had been and everything he still was. The base had laughed once. Now it didn't. Now it understood. Eldon Pike, Janitor and Ghost, had returned and nothing would ever be the same. The sea whispered against the shore in rhythm with his heartbeat. The world had shifted and Eldon finally felt at peace with the weight of it all. He had faced the past, tamed the present, and earned the right to walk forward without hiding. For the first time in decades he allowed himself to smile. And somewhere deep inside he knew the base and its people would never doubt the man behind the mop again. The base was quiet now. Not the sterile quiet of routine, but the settled calm after storms pass. Morning mist drifted over the asphalt, curling around the edges of the training yard. Eldon walked slowly, unhurried, boots scuffing faintly, every step deliberate. Soldiers moved around him, but this time they didn't just follow orders. They watched, they listened, they remembered. He felt their eyes, not with fear but with recognition. Commander Voss approached, carrying a folder of reports. He handed it to Eldon silently. No words were needed. Eldon opened it. Every operation, every training protocol, every maneuver Rowan's team had attempted, and how it had been intercepted, documented meticulously. You've changed the base, Voss said quietly. Eldon didn't respond. He didn't need to. The reports weren't proof for him, they were proof for those who would come after. The legacy he'd reclaimed was already being written. In the mess hall, the lieutenant from that first morning approached once more, this time holding a cup of coffee. Sir, he said softly, thank you, for last night. For everything. Eldon took it, nodded. Words weren't necessary. They had learned the truth. He was no longer the old janitor. He was the man who had carried the weight of history, who had fought ghosts in silence, and who had come back to shape the future. Eldon stepped outside. Sunlight caught the waves along the distant shoreline, casting silver glints across the water. He raised his sleeve briefly, letting the Frogman tattoo catch the light. It wasn't just a mark of survival, it was a reminder of duty, courage, and the men and women who had trusted him in darkness. The weight of years, mistakes, and missions pressed lightly now, softened by the knowledge that he had done what few could. From the edge of the yard, he watched the young soldiers train, their movements precise but alive with energy and hope. He smiled faintly. They would carry this knowledge forward. They would carry the story of the janitor who was once invisible, and who had returned when the world needed him most. Eldon felt something he hadn't in years, quiet pride. As he walked back to his quarters, a breeze carried the scent of salt and iron, mingled with the distant sound of waves. He paused at the gate, looking back at the base one last time. The laughter, the doubt, the underestimation, they were gone. He had transformed them all with one simple truth: ghosts don't retire and the past never truly leaves you. Eldon Pike, old janitor, forgotten frogman, survivor and teacher, walked toward the horizon, leaving behind a base forever changed. The world would remember him not for the mop in his hands, but for the courage in his heart, the precision in his mind, and the legacy of the man who refused to be invisible. And somewhere, deep in the shadows where danger still lingered, enemies reconsidered their plans. Because the janitor was no longer just a janitor. He was a reckoning. The sea whispered, the waves rolled, and Eldon Pike vanished into the light of a new day, seen, remembered, unstoppable.